Was about to explode, and said to Clara Blake, "What exactly are you trying to do?" "Nothing much," Clara replied. "I just want the Chelan fruit." Clara Blake shrugged, her expression indifferent. "The Chelan fruit is very important to me. Consider it as repayment for saving my Peter, all right?" The woman in front of him was extremely annoying, yet he couldn't bring himself to hate her. Not because of her identity as an alchemist, but simply because she was a person, a woman. One matter is one matter. The Chelan fruit is also very important to me. She looked at Charles Anderson, seemingly pondering something, then added, "I can refine a bamboo sun pill for you as repayment, but the Chelan fruit, I must have it." Looking at her stunningly beautiful face and her unwavering, determined eyes, he felt his heart skip a beat. His gaze toward her began to feel unnatural. The auctioneer at the center of the hall, noticing the two engrossed in their conversation, raised his voice and said, "Miss Blake has bid 16,001. Is there anyone willing to bid higher?" The hall fell silent, and no one in the VIP section raised their paddle. Charles Anderson pondered for a moment. While the Chelan fruit was indeed exceptional, the bamboo sun pill was no ordinary elixir either. A single bamboo sun pill could help him break through his bottleneck without excessive cost. Wasn't this a profitable trade? Finally, Charles Anderson sat down, tossing the number card in his hand onto the table. The silver hammer in the auctioneer's hand fell once more, and Clara Blake ultimately emerged victorious, obtaining the rare spiritual medicine, the Chelan fruit. Surrounded by protective escorts, Sophia Lewis, the fourth young master of the spiritual medicine aristocratic family, personally carried a jade bottle to the VIP lounge to complete the transaction with Clara Blake. Sophia Lewis, at 23 years old, exuded an innate elegance and refined demeanor. "Miss Blake, it's been a while." Sophia Lewis's bright eyes fixed on Clara Blake, a smile dancing in the corners of his eyes and brows. Clara Blake also smiled, but her smile carried a hint of sarcasm. "Didn't we just meet last year?" Glancing at the jade bottle in his hand, she added, "It's only been half a year, and your Chelan tree has already borne fruit." Sophia Lewis wasn't offended, only smiled gently and said, "This Chelan fruit isn't from the Lin Doak family, I happened to acquire it by chance." "Miss Blake, don't misunderstand. The moment he obtained the Chelan fruit, he had wanted to give it to Clara Blake. However, who would have thought she had already left the Lin Doak Valley and disappeared without a trace? Thus, he brought it to the largest auction house in the Vermilion Empire, certain that she would hear about it and come. Clara Blake pouted and said no more. Sophia Lewis was indeed generous to her, having gifted her many spiritual medicines for free. Moreover, his relationship with Peter wasn't bad, and he knew the Chelan fruit would be beneficial to Peter. If he had the Chelan fruit, there was no reason for him not to inform her. Clara Blake took out a stack of banknotes from her spatial ring, each worth 10,000 gold coins. She counted 16 notes and handed them to Sophia Lewis. "No change, just round it off." Sophia Lewis reached out to take them and smiled, "Whatever you say." He wasn't lacking in money, and neither was this elder sister of his, she didn't lack a single coin. Lady Clara Blake grabbed the Chelan fruit and swiftly tucked it into her spatial ring along with the remaining stack of banknotes. At that very moment, William Blake and Amelia Blake stormed into the VIP lounge, heading straight toward Clara Blake. Before William Blake could even steady himself, his hand was already raised high, aiming to slap Clara Blake across the face. Charles Anderson, who was seated at a small table about 3 meters away from Clara Blake, sipping tea, saw this and acted without hesitation. In a flash, he was by her side, firmly gripping William Blake's wrist and locking it in place. "Lord Blake, if there's an issue, let's discuss it calmly. Why resort to violence like this?" Charles Anderson's expression darkened. William Blake had not anticipated Charles Anderson would intervene so openly. The sharp pain in his wrist made his face twist as though he had bitten into a chili pepper. "Your Highness, she is my daughter." Is it wrong for me to discipline my own child? Charles Anderson forcefully pushed William Blake's hand away and coldly said, if you want to teach someone a lesson, do it at home. Don't make a fool of yourself in front of me. William Blake's face turned crimson and then faltered. Being born as a second son, he had always harbored feelings of inferiority. In front of someone as noble as Charles Anderson, whatever pride he had, completely deflated. Amelia Blake stood behind her father, eagerly anticipating the spectacle of Clara Blake being humiliated. However, to her surprise, several heroes came to Clara's rescue, and they were all influential figures. This left Amelia both envious and resentful. Henry Owen, a tactful businessman, quickly stepped in to mediate when he noticed the tension rising. The affairs of the Blake family are your private matters, and we outsiders have no place to interfere. However, I must say, my son Peter and Miss Blake get along quite well. I hope you won't make things difficult for them. William Blake's face grew even stiffer. Among the three men standing before him, there wasn't a single one he dared to offend. He let out an awkward laugh and stiffly replied, you must be joking, young master of the Owens bloodline. Clara is my own daughter. How could I bear to make things difficult for her? Internally, William Blake was seething with rage. Though he couldn't act now, once they returned to the manor, he was determined to teach that insolent girl a lesson she would never forget. With that thought, he turned to Sophia Lewis with a fawning smile. Young Master Lin, I deeply apologize. My young daughter acted impulsively and purchased your spiritual medicine on a whim. However, 1.6 million gold taels is no small amount. I have always been upright and honest, and I truly do not have such a large sum. I hope young Master Lin will be generous and let this matter go. Sophia Lewis maintained her gentle and graceful demeanor, slightly nodding at William Blake as she slowly spoke. The Chelan fruit has already been paid for by Miss Blake. The transaction is complete. What does Marquis Blake mean by this? Are you intending to return the goods? Charles Anderson snorted disdainfully. Return the goods? I would be overjoyed if that were the case. Paid in full. Transaction complete. 1.6 million gold taels. William Blake looked at Clara Blake in disbelief, unable to trust his own ears. Clara Blake glared at Charles Anderson, pouting, return the goods. How embarrassing. With that, she turned to Henry Owen and said, let's go, find Peter for me. Without a word, Henry Owen quickly slipped out of the VIP lounge and rushed straight to the third floor. William Blake was even more bewildered. What kind of spell had this girl cast on these people? One after another, why did everyone act so strangely? The young master of the illustrious Owens bloodline family was running errands for her. Peter quickly returned with Henry Owen, holding a stack of banknotes in his hand, his face beaming with joy. He paid no attention to anyone in the room, rushed over to Clara Blake, and raised the stack of banknotes as if showing off his spoils. Mother, I've earned another 100,000 gold coins. Clara Blake remained calm, reached out to pat her black-haired son's head, and gently said, good boy, Peter. Keep it and buy yourself some candy. With that, the mother and son walked hand in hand out of the VIP lounge, leaving William Blake and his daughter dumbfounded. 100,000 gold coins, for candy. How much candy would that even buy? On their way back to the Marquis, Amelia Blake persistently demanded that William Blake confiscate Clara Blake's spatial ring as soon as they returned. She was convinced that the ring must contain an unimaginable fortune. Without Amelia Blake's reminder, William Blake had already been mulling over this idea the entire journey. Just the Chelan fruit and the 100,000 gold coins in Peter Blake's possession were enough to ensure a life of luxury for him. Upon arriving at the Blake estate, Amelia Blake immediately recounted everything to concubine Duong. The mother and daughter were overjoyed, jumping up and down as if the 100,000 gold coins were already piled up in front of them, ready for their indulgence. Chapter 32, Betrayal. desertion in the face of battle. Before he could even take a sip of tea, William Blake stormed into the hall with great fury. It was mealtime, and the old matron, Clara Blake, and Peter had just sat down at the dining table when William Blake barged in. "Clara, be honest. How do you know those three distinguished individuals?" In the past, he wouldn't have wasted words on her, just a slap across the face would have sufficed. But now things were different, those three were no ordinary people. He needed to figure out the situation before making any decisions. Clara Blake calmly placed a piece of tender white fish on Peter's plate and replied nonchalantly, "Nothing special, just got acquainted, that's all." William Blake sneered coldly. If it was truly nothing special and they weren't close, then she shouldn't blame him for being ruthless. He stepped up to Clara Blake and pointed at the spatial ring on her finger. "From now on, you're not allowed to go to the trading house anymore. Hand over the spatial ring to me for safekeeping." The old matron slammed her chopsticks onto the table, her face darkened with anger. "Shameless. After taking her dowry, now you're eyeing her assets too. Do you even know what shame is?" William Blake was fuming. It was bad enough to endure humiliation outside, but this was Blake Estate, his domain. How dare she speak so insolently to him? Did she still see him as the insignificant younger son he once was? "I kindly remind Mother to remember this, in Blake Estate, I am the master. Without my consent, you women have no right to speak." It was the first time William Blake had raised his voice at the old matron, making it clear that he intended to sever ties. But the old matron wasn't afraid of him. To her, the bond between them had long since withered. "Without me, don't even dream of sitting in the Marquis seat of Blake Estate. Ungrateful and shameless. Get out of my hall." The old matron, furious, wanted nothing more than to throw him out of the house immediately. William Blake snorted coldly, ignoring the old matron's outburst. He turned to glare at Clara Blake. "As long as you obediently hand over the spatial ring and keep your mouth shut, you'll remain the esteemed young lady of this Marquis household." Clara Blake seemed entirely unaffected by the tense atmosphere. She continued peeling shrimp for her son, dipping the plump shrimp into a fragrant sauce before placing it into Peter's mouth. Slowly, she wiped her hands with a damp cloth, her red lips parting slightly. "And if I refuse?" A sinister glint flashed across William Blake's once handsome face. "If you refuse, don't blame a father for being ruthless." The corners of Clara Blake's lips, as beautiful as cherry blossoms, curled into a mocking smile. "Father has been ruthless to his daughter more than once. Why bother giving a warning now? If you have the skill, go ahead and show it." The old madam gestured to Madame Wang, who immediately understood and clapped her hands 3 times. Suddenly, 2 shadowy figures appeared beside William Blake like specters. Seeing this, William Blake burst out laughing and said, "You wretched old man, so you really did bring shadow guards into the manor." "When Eleanor told me, I didn't believe her, but it seems she was right." "Too bad for you. If you can name your price, then I, William Blake, can certainly name mine." He turned to command the 2 shadow guards, "Tie up this wretched old man." The guards immediately obeyed, moving swiftly, causing the old madam to break out in a cold sweat. These shadow guards were clearly hired by her, how could they turn against her at the crucial moment? The guards moved with lightning speed, appearing behind the old madam in the blink of an eye. Both struck simultaneously, but Madame Wang threw herself in their way, only to be knocked to the ground by a single palm strike. Clara Blake's fingers twitched slightly, and 2 chopsticks from the dining table shot toward the 2 shadow guards. They dodged quickly, but to their shock, the chopsticks seemed to have eyes, turning mid-air and piercing straight into their chests. Blood sprayed everywhere, staining the entire room red. William Blake hadn't even seen how Clara Blake made her move before the 2 guards collapsed to the ground. You've been practicing martial arts." William Blake stammered in disbelief, pointing at Clara Blake as if she'd betrayed him. What? Is it so strange that I, Clara Blake, can practice martial arts? Does it shock you that much? Clara Blake stared at William Blake, whose expression was a mix of astonishment and horror, as if he were looking at a monster. You were clearly a useless wretch, without spiritual roots. How could you possibly practice martial arts? This is absolutely impossible. One of the main reasons William Blake despised Clara Blake so much was revealed. After the princess consort had passed away, he'd taken the 1-month-old Clara to the Spirit Root Hall to have her foundation tested. The result was that she was deemed of waste, which only deepened his dislike for her. The old madam looked at William Blake, her face free of blame but filled with resignation, and sighed, "You didn't even know about this? Your entire life has been ruined by Eleanor Reed. If the heavens bring calamity, one may still survive, but if one brings calamity upon oneself, there is no escape." At this moment, William Blake was startled. Eleanor Reed had a relative, the very person in charge of the Ling Ji temple. Could it be that she had meddled in this? He didn't want to pursue past matters anymore, but now, with the arrow already on the bowstring, he had no choice but to release it. There was no turning back for him. He quickly drew a short sword from his sleeve, pale blue energy slowly emanating from his palm. "I'll ask one last time, are you going to hand over the spatial ring willingly or not?" Peter swallowed the shrimp in his mouth, raised his chubby little hand, and said to William Blake, "I also have a spatial ring, Grandpa. Do you want to take mine?" Only then did William Blake notice the ring on Peter's chubby hand. Sure enough, it was a spatial ring, with a coiled dragon design, a high-grade type comparable to the dragon-patterned spatial ring on Clara Blake's hand. Looking at the ring on his own hand, though also a spatial ring, it was just a very ordinary snake-patterned one. Seeing the greed in William Blake's eyes, Clara Blake couldn't help but sneer coldly. "What's the matter? Father, are you even going to covet a child's belongings now?" William Blake said nothing more, realizing the other party would never hand it over willingly. He had no choice but to seize it by force. The pale blue energy from his palm surged, transforming the short sword in his hand into a long sword, which he thrust directly at Peter Blake's forehead. The teacup in Clara Blake's hand instantly turned to powder as killing intent surged on her face. "Well done, William Blake, how dare you act so ruthlessly, even openly attacking your own grandson." Though furious, Clara Blake did not make a move. With William Blake's abilities, he posed no real threat to Peter. The energy sword from William Blake moved toward Peter Blake, but the tip stopped half an inch from Peter's forehead. No matter how hard William Blake tried, he couldn't advance it any further. A familiar yet terrifying pressure enveloped him. The source of this pressure was none other than his own grandson. Peter Blake raised an eyebrow, his face showing a mischievous expression. "Grandpa, what's wrong? Why are you pointing a sword at Peter?" William Blake was in a miserable state now, unable to advance or retreat. The power within his body was continuously draining, and before long, he would collapse from exhaustion. "What kind of demonic technique have you practiced? Why is my energy being drained?" William Blake roared angrily, trying to stop the energy from flowing out, but to no avail. Peter blinked innocently and smiled sweetly. "What is Grandpa talking about? Who's draining your energy?" William Blake bellowed, "You little brat, stop pretending. Stop it now. Do you want to commit such an unfilial act?" Clara Blake snorted coldly, glanced at William Blake, and said icily, "You call yourself a grandfather, yet you point a sword at your own grandson. You won't even spare a child. Tell me, is there anyone in this world more heartless than you?" Chapter 33, What have you done to me? William Blake choked, momentarily at a loss for words to argue, and could only spit out hatefully, "Unless you kill me right now, otherwise, William Blake, will never let this go." His eyes glinted with malice as he scrutinized the three people in front of him. He was certain that Clara Blake wouldn't dare to kill him. After all, he was a dignified noble of a Marquis household. If he were to die mysteriously, the court would undoubtedly intervene. No matter how formidable Clara Blake was, could she possibly stand against an entire nation? Clara Blake slowly stood up, her gaze icy as she stared at William Blake. She spoke each word deliberately, feeling proud. Are you so sure I wouldn't dare to act? You're right, I don't intend to kill you. Killing you would be too easy. I'll let you live a long life in this world, watching as you lose everything, enduring a dark existence where you can never hold your head high again. Only then will it be worthy of my late mother and the suffering my son has endured all these years. William Blake felt his hair stand on end under her piercing stare. His legs trembled, and an unprecedented fear rose within him. The woman before him, with her cold demeanor and bloodthirsty smile at the corner of her lips, no, she wasn't Clara Blake. The Clara Blake he knew had been timid as a mouse since childhood, always hiding behind the old matriarch when trouble arose. When had she ever dared to speak to him like this? Who are you? Who are you really? You're not Clara Blake. Why are you impersonating her? William Blake stammered, his face filled with terror. Clara Blake lightly waved her sleeve, a silvery force shot out, striking directly at William Blake. William Blake only felt that the last trace of vital energy remaining in his body was completely stripped away. His right hand, which was holding the sword and pointing at Peter Blake's forehead, from the wrist upward, every bone shattered. He could only watch helplessly as his body, like a falling leaf, slammed against the wall. His entire right arm went limp and powerless, as if it no longer belonged to him. You, what have you done to me? William Blake stared in horror at his arm. He couldn't even feel a trace of pain, nor the existence of his right arm. The vital energy in his body had vanished as if it had never been there. Scared? Hurt? Her beautiful eyes were filled with resentment. Because of him, Peter had to endure unimaginable suffering from the moment he was born. Because of him, she lived every day in constant fear, terrified of losing Peter. The game has only just begun. Just wait and see. At this moment, Madame Wang had regained consciousness. Seeing the scene before her, she was momentarily stunned. The old matriarch was both shocked and delighted, shocked at Clara Blake's drastic transformation, as if she had become a completely different person, and delighted that Clara Blake now had the ability to protect herself. She no longer had to worry about Clara being bullied. Madame Wang, please escort the master back to his room. Clara Blake didn't spare William Blake another glance. She turned and sat back beside Peter, continuing to peel shrimp for him. Madame Wang obeyed, hurriedly helping the trembling William Blake, whose legs could hardly support him, out of an show hall. Outside the door, Eleanor Reed and Amelia Blake had been waiting for a long time. The mother and daughter were beaming with joy, thinking that the master must have obtained the spatial ring by now. Imagining the 10,000 taels of gold and their impending luxurious life, they couldn't contain their excitement. Waiting and waiting, they finally witnessed William Blake reduced to a cripple. They ultimately understood that Clara Blake was no longer the little weakling she once was, she had turned into a fierce tiger that devoured anyone in her way. Seeing William Blake's miserable state, Eleanor Reed began contemplating leaving. If Clara could be so ruthless even to her own father, what chance did she stand? Previously, Eleanor had been arrogant, relying solely on William Blake's power. Now that he had fallen, she was nothing more than an ant, easily crushed by Clara Blake at any moment. While Eleanor Reed was secretly packing her belongings, preparing to flee the Marquis' residence with her children, she suddenly realized her precious son had vanished. As the mother and son duo were discussing sending someone to search for him, a servant rushed in, panicked, reporting that the mansion gates had been blocked. The young master had been tied up like a dumpling and thrown unceremoniously outside. The mother and son hurriedly ran to the gate, only to see the boy beaten black and blue, his face swollen, clothes tattered, covered in blood, with whip marks clearly visible. Seeing his mother and sister, the boy frantically cried out for help. "Are you the mother of this brat?" A burly, bearded man turned to Eleanor Reed, who was trembling with rage, and asked. Eleanor Reed rushed to embrace her son, trembling as she untied him, screaming, "Who are you people? How dare you assault someone in broad daylight? Do you even know where you are? I'll have all of you thrown into prison." The bearded man laughed loudly. "Go ahead, throw me in prison if you can. But before that, you'd better pay me back the money your son owes me. Otherwise, I'll take his life right here and now." "You're lying. How could my son owe you money? Don't try to deceive me. Someone, go report this to the authorities." Eleanor Reed held her son tightly, seeing blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. She was speechless, her heart aching as if it were being torn apart. The bearded man snorted, pulling out a piece of paper from his chest. On it were the clear words, "Debt agreement," along with her son's signature and fingerprint. When her eyes fell on the amount, 3,000 gold taels, Eleanor Reed's vision darkened, and she nearly fainted. 3,000 gold taels were her entire fortune, painstakingly saved over years by selling off bits of Clara Blake's dowry. "I don't believe it. Why would my son borrow money from you? You must have tricked him." Eleanor Reed protested, her face flushed with anger, her heart burning with anxiety. These people clearly weren't ones to mess with. Now that the Marquis was bedridden, the old matron refused to help, and her own family offered no support. How could she possibly fight them alone? The bearded man sneered again. "I, Benjamin Carter, may love money, but I do honest business. Your son lost at my gambling house and borrowed 3,000 gold taels. Many people can testify to this. Even if we go to court, I have the evidence. As the ancients say, a debt must be repaid. If he can't pay, he'll have to give his life in return. I, Benjamin Carter, live as a man of honor. If you try to default, even if I end up in prison, I'll take his life. Think carefully." Eleanor Reed felt her world spinning. If she didn't pay, her son would lose his life. But if she paid, how could she survive? Seeing Eleanor Reed frozen in place, Benjamin Carter drew a dagger from his belt and slowly stepped toward her. "I don't have time to waste on you. If you won't pay, then leave his life here." With those words, he raised the dagger, the blade aimed directly at the young boy's chest. Eleanor Reed screamed in terror. "Stop! Don't kill him. I'll pay, all right." She held her son tightly, refusing to let Benjamin Carter harm him. Amelia Blake collapsed to the ground. She knew they were doomed, truly doomed. Eleanor Reed spent all her money to ransom her child, leaving herself penniless. Seeing her son covered in injuries, her heart ached as if it were being pierced by knives. How could they be so cruel to her precious boy? He was only 14, still just a child. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. The more she thought, the more she felt this matter was undoubtedly connected to Clara Blake. Finally, she stormed straight into the Wenduong. There, she saw Clara Blake chatting animatedly with the elderly woman. On the table lay a small stack of banknotes and a pile of land deeds, properties, and store ownerships, everything Clara Blake had amassed from the Blake estate over the years. Now, all of it was neatly placed in front of her. Chapter 34, The Fulfillment of Malicious Resentment. The woman charged forward, pointing at Clara Blake and shouting, "So it was you. I knew it couldn't be a coincidence. You've been scheming behind our backs all along. I'm going to report this to the authorities." Clara Blake lazily raised her eyes to glance at her, replying calmly, "Go ahead. Your son borrowed money and now has to repay it. Do you think you have a case to report? This was all your plot to frame us. It has nothing to do with my son." Eleanor Reed raised her head and roared, her face flushed red with anger. "Speak with evidence, or I'll sue you for slander." Clara Blake remained calm and composed, as if discussing someone else's affairs, which only made Eleanor Reed grind her teeth in fury. Eleanor Reed trembled as she pointed at the stack of banknotes on the table, shouting. "Here. These are the evidence. I clearly gave them to Benjamin Carter, so why are they in your hands? And you still claim this has nothing to do with you?" Clara Blake coldly gazed at Eleanor Reed, her eyes filled with mockery. "Yours? What proof do you have that they're yours? You're merely a lowly concubine with a monthly allowance of 10 taels of silver. After expenses, what do you have left? Do you even have a generous dowry? These shops, these estates, where did you get them from?" Eleanor Reed staggered, almost falling, her vision darkened. She had nearly forgotten her own status. Sold by her parents into the royal household as a servant since childhood, she later followed Linda Anderson to marry into the Blake estate as a maid. Even with William Blake's favor, she was still just a concubine. Without her natal family's support or financial resources, how could she have acquired such wealth if not by spending Linda Anderson's dowry? She gritted her teeth, lifting her head to glare at Clara Blake, her eyes brimming with malicious resentment. "Fine, let's not talk about these for now. But why did you target my 14-year-old son? What crime has he committed? How could you be so heartless?" Every time she thought of her son's wounds, his body covered in blood, her heart ached unbearably. Clara Blake closed her eyes, slowly stood up, and walked toward Eleanor Reed. Meeting her resentful gaze, she spoke coldly. "Your son is human, but does that mean the children of others are not human? You feel heartbroken when your son gets hit a few times, yet you had the heart to order the destruction of a 14-year-old girl's purity. How could you be so cruel?" Eleanor Reed stepped back a few paces, horrified as she looked at Clara Blake. So, she knew. She knew everything. Was she back this time for revenge? What's wrong? Lost for words? Don't be afraid, this is only the beginning. The suffering in your lives is far from over. I will show you what true karmic retribution looks like. Clara Blake coldly stared at Eleanor Reed, this cruel woman. Killing her would be as easy as flipping a hand, yet Clara deliberately spared her life, so she could witness her own children step by step descend into an inescapable abyss. It was all me. If you want to kill or punish someone, deal with me. My son and daughter know nothing of this. Please, spare them. Eleanor Reed thought of William Blake's fate and realized that no matter what, she couldn't win against Clara. She decided it was better to plead for mercy, hoping for even a sliver of hope. Clara Blake coldly gazed at Eleanor's ever-changing expressions. Did Eleanor think everyone in this world was as foolish as William Blake? That they would believe her lies? Did she really expect Clara to think of her as a loving mother? Even if she were truly a loving mother, what did that have to do with Clara? Clara kicked Eleanor Reed, who was clutching her legs, aside and calmly said, "I ask myself, what have I done wrong? Yet you have schemed against me time and time again. What now? Your children are human, and I am not." Seeing Clara's icy demeanor, Eleanor Reed realized that begging was futile. She decided to try another approach, stood up with a heavy heart, wiped her tears, and quietly left in the hall. Witnessing the scene, Madame Blake opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to utter a word. She knew she too had wronged Clara Blake and had no right to plead for forgiveness for the descendants of Blake estate. Now, the entire Blake estate survived solely on the meager 100 taels of silver from William Blake's government stipend. Most of the servants had already left, except for a few bonded ones, and those who remained worked sluggishly, as they hadn't been paid in months. And though Hall seemed entirely unaffected by the financial storm wreaking havoc on Blake estate, continuing its indulgent lifestyle as usual. This left William Blake and Eleanor Reed agonizing day and night, unable to do anything about it. What? Say that again, clearly. Charles Anderson slammed the table and stood up abruptly, his eyes wide as he stared at the man in front of him. The man shrank back and recounted, "This is absolutely true. 5 years ago, it was one of the aunts from Blake Estate who gave old Wu 100 taels of silver, instructing him to go to a brothel to buy an aphrodisiac. Then, they hired a pockmarked man to ambush outside the Great Qing Temple on the 15th day of the 5th month. The Mid-Autumn Festival. Charles Anderson furrowed his brow. 5 years ago, on the exact day of the Mid-Autumn Festival, Clara Blake was caught red-handed. Rumor had it there wasn't a single man in the room, only Clara Blake lying unconscious and completely bare. It seemed she had indeed been framed. With a loud crash, the mahogany table beside him shattered into dust under his furious palm strike. His face twisted, teeth clenched tightly as he spat out, "Well done, William Blake. You've got yourself quite a wife." Knowing full well she was my fiancée, Charles Anderson's fiancée, yet you dared to play tricks and put a crown of horns on this king's head. Excellent, truly excellent. Not long after, the court officials submitted a joint petition accusing William Blake of numerous crimes, each charge laid out clearly. Even the fourth prince stopped defending him and requested a leave of absence from court. The emperor flew into a rage, immediately issuing a decree to strip William Blake of his title and confiscate the Blake estate. This outcome was beyond the expectations of the Blake matriarch. She had initially planned to dethrone William Blake from his position as Marquis and select another heir from the Blake estate. Who would have thought things would spiral to such a disastrous end? The matriarch, however, had long been prepared. She had already purchased a house in the outskirts of the capital, complete with servants and maids. When the imperial decree was announced, she remained relatively composed. William Blake and his family slumped to the ground, unable to rise for a long time. The iron rice bowl that sustained their livelihood was gone. How were they supposed to survive now? That night, Eleanor Reed, clutching her last jewelry box, gathered her children and quietly fled the Blake estate, leaving the crippled William Blake to fend for himself. Only then did William Blake truly comprehend the difference between a first wife and a concubine. If Linda Anderson were still alive, as his lawful wife, she would never have abandoned him like Eleanor Reed did. Thinking further, if Linda Anderson were alive, he surely wouldn't have fallen into such a dire predicament. Alas, in this world, there is no medicine for regret. The rise and fall of the Blake estate, its prosperity and its ruin, were all because of women. The day the mansion was sealed, Clara Blake declined the old madam's kind offer and took Peter onto the carriage of the fourth prince's residence. The fourth prince's residence hosted a peony banquet, purchasing all the renowned peonies in the city to decorate the garden where the banquet was held. Every child of officials ranked fourth or above in the capital, as long as they were unmarried, received an invitation from the fourth prince's residence. The invitation merely stated it was to find companions for the young masters and ladies in the residence, but everyone understood the real purpose. It was simply an excuse by the fourth prince, who, in truth, was seeking a husband for his illegitimate granddaughter. Though no one truly wanted to marry such a woman, human curiosity is a peculiar thing. By dusk, the gates of the fourth prince's residence were bustling. Carriages lined the streets, and people crowded in. While they had no intention of marrying Clara Blake, they were eager to see what this woman with an illegitimate child looked like. Immediately, the young masters and ladies in the garden of the prince's residence scattered like bees from a broken hive, buzzing about everywhere. Hashtag Chapter 35, What Makes the Best Dad? The fourth prince raised his wine cup, laughing heartily with delight. It had been years since the royal residence had been this lively. With so many young gentlemen gathered, surely one or two would catch the eye of his precious little Clara. "Wait, isn't that the second prince?" a feminine voice exclaimed, her small, delicate hand covering her mouth as her wide eyes reflected her surprise. "Why is he here?" Clara Blake was his former fiancée, and she even gave him a long, humiliating betrayal. Could he have come to settle the score with Clara Blake? And the man behind him, isn't that the young master from the Owens bloodline family? Why would he be here too? Looking at the way the second prince is speaking with the fourth prince, it doesn't seem like he's here for revenge. Could it be he's forgotten what happened 5 years ago? Forgotten or not, what does it matter? You girls only focus on the surface and know nothing of the deeper truths. The fourth prince, despite his age, holds an incredibly significant position in the court. While he doesn't have a legitimate son, his secondary sons are all remarkably talented. Whether it's the crown prince or the second prince, the fourth prince is someone they both aim to win over. A mere scandal involving a woman, do you think men with grand ambitions like them would waste time fretting over such trivialities? A composed young lady spoke slowly, her tone carrying an air of authority as though she understood the intricacies of court politics. She cast a disdainful glance at the other noble ladies, silently thinking how foolish and ignorant they all were. The young ladies nodded repeatedly. The girl before them was none other than the eldest daughter of the Prime Minister's household, Mo Schwer. Known for her arrogance and high standards, she often relied on her father's influence in the court to mock them. They could only harbor resentment silently without daring to speak up. "Who is that over there? He's so handsome, I don't think I've ever seen him before," a young lady in a pink dress exclaimed, staring intently at the man in white approaching from afar. Mo Schwer followed the direction of her gaze. As the man in white looked over, her heart seemed to leap out of her chest. His elegant features were as refined as jade, his demeanor cold and distant, and his deep, alluring eyes captivated anyone who looked into them. As he gradually approached, she felt her breath hitch, unable to take her eyes off his face. "That's Julian, the eldest legitimate son of Prince Juan. It's said he rarely goes out and dislikes attending events like this. I saw him once at a royal banquet 3 years ago, he was truly extraordinary." Another young lady shared what she knew, her face revealing undisguised admiration. "He is indeed handsome, but it's a pity he has a stepmother as fierce as a tiger. Prince Juan is chronically ill and bedridden most of the year. With a stepmother who has her own son, who knows if the title of prince will even belong to him in the future," another young lady remarked regretfully, seemingly lamenting Julian's circumstances. "What do you know? In our country, the inheritance of the title is based on legitimate succession. Julian is both the eldest and the legitimate heir, why wouldn't he inherit the title?" Mo Schwer retorted, blushing as she scolded the girl who had spoken. The group of young ladies stuck out their tongues, not daring to argue further. By the time they looked again, Julian had already disappeared. In one of the rooms in the rear courtyard of the prince's residence, Clara Blake changed into a new outfit her grandfather had made for her. Knowing her preferences, he had specially chosen a piece of western silk brocade. The collar and sleeves were embroidered with red plum blossoms, paired with a belt adorned with rubies, accentuating her graceful figure. "Mother, you look so beautiful." Peter tilted his head, watching his mother apply makeup. He then asked, "Mother, is Uncle Quinn really not my father?" The hand applying makeup paused, thinking of Julian Quinn's sky splitter palace and his masked face. A man like that must surely hide countless unspeakable secrets. Someone who has to live behind a mask is too dark and mysterious. Even if he were Peter's biological father, she absolutely could not let Peter acknowledge him. Smiling softly, she set down the eyebrow brush, embraced her son, and gently said, "Peter, don't worry. Mother will definitely find you the most wonderful father in the world, all right?" "What is the most wonderful father like?" Peter asked curiously, eager to meet this so-called perfect father. Clara Blake thought hard, trying to paint a picture of what the most wonderful would be. At the very least, he must have money, lots of money. He must also be handsome so you won't feel embarrassed. And he must protect both mother and Peter. Otherwise, what use would he be? I can't think of anything else for now. I'll add more when I do. A flash of white appeared at the door, and an attractive smile curled on his lips. Must have money, must be handsome, must be skilled in martial arts. It seemed he met all the criteria. Clara Blake had just finished dressing Peter in new clothes when a maid's voice came from outside. "Miss Lamb, the prince invites you to the rear garden. I understand. Please inform the prince that I will be there shortly, Clara Blake replied. She gently adjusted Peter's outfit, tying his shoulder-length hair neatly. Looking at her adorable, jade-like son, her smile was as sweet as honey. Mother, why does grandfather invite so many strangers to the mansion to play? Peter held Clara Blake's hand tightly, his face slightly displeased as he gazed at the bustling crowd in the distance. Grandfather is afraid that Mother and Peter will feel lonely, so he invites many people to make the house lively. If Peter doesn't like it, Mother will tell Grandfather not to do it anymore in the future, alright? Clara Blake slightly furrowed her brows. She wasn't fond of situations like this, but since it was her grandfather's goodwill, she found it hard to refuse. Mother, look! Uncle from the Owens bloodline and Uncle Anderson are here too. Look over there. Peter pointed toward the two men standing beside the fourth prince. His earlier displeased expression faded, finally spotting familiar faces, making this gathering a little less dull. Clara Blake softly acknowledged with a hum. Their presence didn't surprise her. With her status as an alchemist, a prince and a young master from a noble family showing up to curry favor was nothing unusual. Charles Anderson, engaged in conversation with the fourth prince, discreetly scanned the surroundings, searching for Clara Blake. It had been months since their last meeting at Owen Trading, yet her image lingered vividly in his mind. Though Clara Blake was undeniably beautiful, Charles Anderson was not someone easily swayed by appearance. Why, then, could he not forget the woman whom society labeled as fallen and ruined? Today, he came to the fourth prince's residence intending to see her again, hoping to sort out his thoughts and find a reason to detest her. However, when Clara Blake finally appeared before him, he realized he could no longer find any reason to dislike her. The sight of her walking hand in hand with Peter Blake was breathtaking, so surreal it felt as if they were celestial beings descending from the heavens rather than mere mortals. Her smile had the power to sway his emotions. Though he knew he shouldn't, his heart refused to obey his will. Perhaps it was time to reconsider his engagement with Clara Blake. Could the severed bond between them be mended? Clara Blake, you look stunning today, Henry Owen praised sincerely. He had encountered women far more beautiful than Clara Blake, but none possessed her unique aura. The subtle dominance exuding from her refined features elevated her beauty, making her appear regal and commanding respect. Clara Blake nodded politely at Henry Owen. She was genuinely grateful to him, for he had once helped her earnestly without any ulterior motives. ####Chapter 36, Who exactly are you? Uncle Owen's bloodline, didn't you see Peter? Peter pouted, his almond-shaped eyes glaring at Henry Owen. He despised men who looked at his mother that way. Had they never seen a beautiful woman before? Henry Owen scratched his head and chuckled awkwardly, how could I not see? Peter is so adorable, it's hard to miss him. The fourth prince took the opportunity to lead Clara Blake around to greet everyone. The young nobleman, upon seeing such a beauty, couldn't help but feel their hearts flutter. But to take her as a wife? Absolutely not. As a concubine? Impossible, she was the niece of the fourth prince. Clara, come here and meet the heir apparent, the fourth prince called. Clara Blake downed her glass of wine, sighed, and turned around. A faint smile appeared on her indifferent face as she slowly walked over to the fourth prince. The man before her wore an elegant white robe, a jet-black jade pendant hung at his side, and his sleeves were embroidered with green bamboo branches, straight and refined like his posture. His phoenix eyes curved into a smile, and her heart trembled. Those eyes, they were unmistakably his. Miss Blake and I have met before, fourth prince. No need for introductions, Julian said with a small smile, his gaze never leaving her, his demeanor utterly composed. The fourth prince, hearing that the two were acquainted, laughed heartily and left. Are you Julian Quinn, or just Julian? As soon as the fourth prince walked away, Clara Blake's smile vanished. She glared at Julian with suspicion. I am Julian, and I am also Julian Quinn. Why? Surprised? Julian Quinn gave a faint smile. With just one glance, he captivated a group of young ladies, while the women on the other side gritted their teeth, glaring daggers at Clara Blake. How dare a faded flower like her openly seduce their idol? Clara Blake scoffed coldly, shooting Julian Quinn a sharp look. I don't care who you are. I'm warning you, stay away from me and my child, or don't blame me for being ruthless. Julian Quinn raised his glass toward Clara Blake, smiling gently. I only do what I like. I never bow to anyone's threats. The way is incompatible, no cooperation is possible. Clara Blake glared, turned around, and walked away. Julian Quinn downed his glass of wine, watching Clara Blake's silhouette fade into the distance. He recalled Peter's warm smile, and a thought in his mind became increasingly clear. Henry Owen kept his gaze fixed on Clara Blake, entirely oblivious to the dagger-like stare directed at him. Helen Anderson clenched her teeth in hatred, opened a packet of white powder, and poured it into a glass of wine, colorless, odorless. She swirled the glass gently, then slowly approached Henry Owen, giving him a firm pat on the shoulder. Henry Owen, what are you staring at? Henry Owen jolted, turning back to see Helen Anderson. Irritated, he snapped, Hey, can't you speak properly? You're a princess, yet you act like a man all the time. You have no grace at all. Helen Anderson wanted to retort badly, her left hand hidden in her sleeve clenched tightly, her knuckles turning white. Usually, she wouldn't just argue back but would also beat him up. However, today, glancing at the glass of wine, she smiled. Brother Henry, I was wrong, okay? Here, drink this to cool off. Henry Owen found Helen Anderson's unusual obedience suspicious. This was unprecedented, and it made him wary. What scheme was this girl plotting now? But he was thirsty, so he took the glass and drank it all. Before long, Henry Owen felt dizzy. He shook his head, trying to stay awake, but eventually collapsed unconscious. Helen Anderson waved her hand, and two strong maids emerged from the shadows, carrying Henry Owen away. As the banquet ended, Charles Anderson didn't immediately return to his residence. Waiting until everyone had dispersed, he approached the fatigued fourth prince. Your Highness. The fourth prince looked at Charles Anderson in confusion, unsure of his intentions. What is it, Charles? Charles Anderson glanced around. The servants were cleaning up, and there were many ears around. May I borrow a moment of your time, fourth uncle? The fourth prince nodded and led him to the front hall. Once the servants had served tea and snacks and left, Charles Anderson finally spoke, his face slightly flushed. Fourth uncle, the Blake estate has declined. Regarding Miss Clara, as you are her guardian, I am here today to propose marriage. I humbly ask you to grant Miss Clara's hand to me. The fourth prince's drowsiness vanished. He widened his eyes at Charles Anderson. Does your father and mother know about this? A woman who already has a child, how could the royal family possibly accept this? Moreover, he is a prince and a potential heir to the throne, this matter is absolutely impossible. Not yet, I want to get the consent of my royal uncle first. Charles Anderson cautiously observed the expression of the fourth prince, feeling uneasy inside. The fourth prince shook his head, my dear nephew, let's not talk about other matters, but as for your marriage, it's not up to you to decide. You know that your father has long promised the Prime Minister's daughter to you. As for Clara, I'm afraid it's out of the question. Charles Anderson shook his head, Uncle, you're overthinking. While I cannot decide on my main wife, I can still make decisions regarding a concubine. A concubine? The fourth prince immediately shook his head, no, absolutely not. Clara once told me that if she were to marry, it must be to someone who is wholeheartedly devoted to her, and she would never accept being a concubine. Let alone being a secondary wife. This is absolutely impossible. Charles Anderson widened his eyes in disbelief. Clara Blake must be insane. Just a fallen flower with some beauty, and she dares to demand monogamy. Ridiculous. Allowing her to be a concubine was already a great honor. Refusing to give up, Charles Anderson thought for a moment, "Royal uncle, just speak to her first. Tomorrow, I will send someone to hear her reply, all right?" The fourth prince reluctantly nodded. After sending Charles Anderson away, he immediately went to Clara Blake's small courtyard and relayed Charles Anderson's intentions. Clara Blake was both amused and annoyed. What kind of trick was Charles Anderson trying to pull? He wanted to marry her. Did he forget about being cuckolded? "Grandfather, tomorrow you can tell him that I don't care for the position of a concubine and that he should abandon the idea," Clara Blake firmly refused, which also reassured the fourth prince. The crown prince and the second prince would undoubtedly fight over the throne in the future, with no room for compromise. The fourth prince didn't want Clara Blake to be dragged into it. Late at night, after coaxing Peter to sleep, she entered the bathroom to wash. The water was lukewarm, and she sank into it, finally allowing her body and mind to relax. Although the Duke's residence was grand and luxurious, it came with many rules and formalities that she disliked. Just a few days there had already left her feeling exhausted. If it weren't for her desire to fulfill her filial duty to the late Clara Blake, she would never have set foot in the Duke's residence. Reflecting on the year, 3 months had already passed, yet 5 ingredients for refining the blood elixir were still missing. She had spent 4 years gathering 10 medicinal ingredients but had only managed to collect 5. Now, with just 9 months left, could she possibly gather the remaining rare herbs in time? The moment she began to relax, the tension crept back in. Every time she thought of Peter's pained face, her heart ached deeply. She wished she could endure all his suffering in his place. What crime had her child committed to deserve such torment? #### Chapter 37, Scoundrel, Let Me Go. Suddenly, a faint noise caught her attention. She quickly leaped out of the water, grabbed a thin silk robe nearby, and draped it over herself before rushing out of the bathroom. The room was dimly lit by a single lantern, casting an ethereal glow. A man dressed in white stood silently by the bed, gazing tenderly at the sleeping Peter. Hearing her footsteps, he turned to look at Clara Blake. Her jet-black hair cascaded down, still dripping with water. Her stunningly beautiful face bore an expression of surprise, and her alabaster neck gleamed against her dark hair. Her slender, graceful figure was barely covered by the thin silk robe, revealing tantalizing curves beneath. He swallowed hard, his voice hoarse as he said, "If it were someone else who came, would you greet them in this state too?" This state? Clara Blake looked down at herself, inspecting what he meant by this state. Under the thin, fragile silk, her curvaceous figure was vividly revealed. Her face flushed red as she hastily covered her chest with her hands and looked up at him, saying, "I believe I made myself very clear, I hope you won't appear again." Julian Quinn turned around, shrugged, and smiled, "I believe I was even clearer, I only do what I want and refuse to be threatened by anyone." Clara Blake was speechless, glaring at Julian Quinn, yet feeling utterly powerless. After all the years in this world, it was the first time she felt so helpless. The man before her, in terms of strength, surpassed her by more than a little. In terms of status, he was the heir apparent, and in terms of their relationship, he was Peter's biological father. Julian Quinn noticed her expression shifting continuously, her face growing more unpleasant, and her breathing increasingly uneven. Her slightly loose collar opened wider. He felt the heat rising in his lower abdomen, his breathing gradually becoming labored. He quickly turned his face away, not daring to look at her further, afraid he might lose control and pounce on her. Clara Blake, seeing him suddenly turn around, thought he might once again try to take Peter like before. She hurriedly ran over, grabbed Julian Quinn's arm, and whispered sharply, "What are you trying to do?" Julian Quinn had practiced martial arts for many years, naturally developing the instincts of a martial artist. When Clara Blake suddenly attacked him from behind, the energy within his body instinctively reacted, pushing her away. Caught off guard, Clara stumbled backward. Seeing this, Julian quickly reached out to catch her. Her slender, soft body fell into his embrace, and a faint, delicate fragrance wafted into his nose, intensifying the heat coursing through him. Falling into his strong, broad arms, Clara's heart skipped a beat, and her face flushed an even deeper red. She wanted to push him away but felt as though she was trying to move an unyielding wall of steel. Against her waist, something firm pressed tightly against her. Not wanting to wake Peter, who was asleep nearby, she merely wriggled in an attempt to free herself. Julian took a deep breath, holding her even tighter, his voice hoarse, "Don't move, or I can't guarantee what might happen next." Clara froze, feeling the hard object against her waist grow even more solid and burning hot. Suddenly realizing what it was, her face turned crimson as if on fire. Biting her lip, she scolded through gritted teeth, "You scoundrel, let go of me now." Looking at her flushed face, Julian's body tensed even more. His mind told him to release her, but his hands and heart refused to obey. Holding her close brought an inexplicable sense of satisfaction that he couldn't resist. Overwhelmed with embarrassment, Clara bit down on his shoulder, only letting go when she tasted the metallic tang of blood. She looked up at him in disbelief. Didn't he feel any pain? Julian frowned slightly, letting out a bitter chuckle. "You truly are a ruthless woman. Even your own husband, you dare to bite. Aren't you afraid I'll divorce you?" Clara Blake felt his arm loosen slightly, and she quickly slipped out of his embrace, angrily saying, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Julian Quinn glanced at the blood-stained white robe and chuckled, "Whether you admit it or not, there are some truths you cannot escape." He looked at Clara Blake with a smile, then turned to Peter with a gentle expression. His hand lightly lifted, and a square sandalwood box appeared in his grasp. He placed the box on the dressing table and said, "This is a gift for Peter. Take good care of it. If anything happens, come to the Celestial Hall to find me. Whatever it is, as long as I can do it, I will help you." With that, he brushed off his sleeves and turned to leave. Clara Blake stood dazed in place. This man had clearly taken liberties with her, yet she let it go just like that. Moreover, she didn't feel the slightest bit of disgust in her heart. What was wrong with her? Opening the sandalwood box on the dressing table, she found 3 smaller boxes inside, 2 long ones made of white jade and 1 makeup box crafted from glass. The body of the makeup box was adorned with multicolored gemstones, which under the dim light emitted a mysterious and dazzling glow, extraordinarily beautiful. This was clearly the item auctioned at Owen Trading that day, indeed purchased by Julian Quinn. Why would he gift it to her? Inside the 2 long boxes were 2 rare medicinal herbs, 2 of the 10 herbs she had been painstakingly searching for to refine the blood elixir. After months of his absence, could it be that he had been searching for medicinal herbs for Peter? The next morning, a piercing scream echoed above the Duke's mansion. It was none other than Henry Owen. Waking up, he found himself lying naked on someone else's bed. More importantly, beside him lay a woman he had been trying to avoid at all costs. What had happened? He clearly remembered drinking Helen Anderson's wine last night. Afterward, he vaguely recalled being helped into a room. In his haze, he seemed to see Clara Blake leaning into his arms, and then he lifted the blanket and saw a bright red bloodstain on the bedsheet. It was over. He was done for. Helen Anderson's lips curled into a triumphant smile. "Henry Owen, for the rest of your life, don't even dream of escaping me, humph." She had always stayed by his side, waiting for him to fall for her. But instead, he foolishly looked at another woman. To lure him into committing this act, she did not hesitate to drug him and even disguised herself as Clara Blake to make it happen. Thinking about how she, a dignified princess, had gone to such lengths for him, if he dared to betray her, she would make sure he had no descendants. Early in the morning, men sent by Charles Anderson were already waiting outside the royal residence. The fourth prince, claiming to be unwell, only sent a letter. His subordinate presented the letter to Charles Anderson, who, upon reading its outright refusal, flew into a rage and smashed everything in his study. "Well done, Clara Blake. Just a ruined woman, and yet you dare to reject me? I will make sure you know that in this world, apart from me, Charles Anderson, no one else would dare accept you and your son." Abandoned by Eleanor Reed, William Blake could no longer endure a life of poverty. One late night, he jumped into the city moat and never returned. Eleanor Reed rented a shabby house for herself and her children. Accustomed to a life of luxury, her children found it unbearable to live in such darkness. Her son returned to the gambling den, taking all of her remaining possessions. A day later, he was beaten nearly to death and thrown out of the gambling house. Eleanor Reed held her bloodied son, crying desperately, but she had not a single penny to treat his injuries. Amelia Blake, once proud and aloof, suddenly felt as if the heavens had collapsed and the earth had crumbled. She wandered the streets like a soulless body, aimless and lost. Perhaps, she should follow her father's path, just close her eyes and jump into some moat to end it all. Amid her inner turmoil, she suddenly saw a faint glimmer of light. Within that radiance, a man in white robes rode a majestic horse through the bustling streets. His black hair fluttered in the wind, his white garments shimmering, and his expressive eyes looked in her direction. She felt breathless, her heart pounding wildly, and her vision filled with nothing but him. Before she knew it, she was secretly following him, weaving through the streets, from east to west. At the western end of the road, the magnificent residence of Prince One appeared. The man dismounted gracefully, handed his horse to a waiting servant, and strode leisurely into the estate. She followed in a daze but was stopped by an elderly steward. "Young lady, are you the new maid? Why are you alone? Weren't there supposed to be 3 of you?" Amelia Blake was startled, about to explain herself, but then thought better of it. The Blake estate was gone, her mother's last bit of wealth had been squandered by her younger brother. And she didn't even know how much longer she could stay at the inn. As for dinner tonight, that was still a mystery. Well, becoming a maid in the manor was better than wandering the streets, and besides, there was that young man too. Ironically, as soon as she signed the indenture contract, the old butler threw her into the servants' quarters. Day after day, she washed clothes and fetched water for the other workers. The white-clad gentleman was nowhere to be seen. Oh, why was her life so full of misfortune? The alchemist's grand assembly? Clara Blake raised an eyebrow, seemingly uninterested. Henry Owen poured tea for Clara Blake with a flattering smile and said, "Exactly right. The alchemist's grand assembly of the Eastern continent is held only once every 10 years. All the major powers send participants, and the rankings determine their prestige." Clara Blake shrugged indifferently. "What does that have to do with me?" Henry Owen chuckled obsequiously. "I want you to represent the Owens bloodline family." Clara Blake looked at Henry Owen as if he were an alien. "Are you crazy? Do you think I'd agree to that?" Still confident, Henry Owen grinned. "Have you ever heard of the Medicine Palace?" Clara Blake nodded. On the Eastern continent, the reputation of the Medicine Pavilion was legendary. As an alchemist, how could she not know? It's said that the Medicine Pavilion has the celestial spirit herb grounds, irrigated with celestial spirit jade water. No spiritual herb fails to thrive there, and any herb with a name can be found in the celestial spirit herb grounds. Clara Blake's eyes sparkled. The spiritual herbs needed to refine the blood essence pill were surely in the Medicine Pavilion. Unfortunately, the Medicine Pavilion was too mysterious, she didn't even know its location. Seeing Clara Blake's reaction, Henry Owen grew even more smug. The rewards for this alchemist grand tournament are provided by the Medicine Pavilion. The top 3 winners will be granted access to the celestial spirit herb grounds to select a rare herb as their prize. Before Henry Owen could finish his sentence, Clara Blake jumped up. Deal. I agree to represent the Owens bloodline family, but the reward belongs to me. Any objections? Henry Owen waved his hands quickly. No objections, of course not. His handsome face brimmed with excitement. Finally, he had a reason to see Clara Blake more often. But when he thought of the fiery woman waiting at home, his mood deflated. Back at the royal mansion, Charles Anderson had been waiting in the front hall for a long time. When he saw Clara Blake strolling in leisurely with Peter, his gloomy mood from waiting instantly brightened, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. Clara, you're back. His Highness, the second prince, has been waiting for you all afternoon. The fourth prince smiled at Clara Blake. Clara Blake glanced at Charles Anderson, her gaze calm and unruffled, then turned to the fourth prince and said, "Take Peter out for a little stroll, his grandfather has been worried." The fourth prince waved his hand and said, "Going out for walks more often is, of course, good. You two can continue your conversation, I'll go rest for a bit. Getting old always leaves one feeling tired." Clara Blake ignored the fervent gaze of Charles Anderson, directly leading Peter to sit down. She nonchalantly said, "I wonder if the second prince has something important to discuss." Charles Anderson withdrew his gaze, lifted the teacup on the table, and took a sip to mask his earlier lapse. When he raised his head again, he deliberately replaced his expression with a cold demeanor and said, "I hope you can represent the Vermilion Empire's royal family at the alchemist conference happening in a month." Peter, who was just about to eat his snack, chuckled and said, "Uncle Prince, you're a step too late. Mother just agreed to represent Uncle from the Owens bloodline family at the alchemist conference." Charles Anderson frowned, looking at Clara Blake, and hurriedly asked, "Is what Peter said true?" Clara Blake shrugged and replied casually, "Yes, I've already agreed with Henry Owen to represent the Owens bloodline family." Charles Anderson's face darkened slightly with anger. That Henry Owen was truly audacious, knowing full well his intentions, yet still daring to. "You must refuse Henry Owen and say you'll represent the royal family instead," Charles Anderson commanded, his expression firm and resolute. Clara Blake raised an eyebrow and replied, "Why should I listen to you?" A gentle remark left Charles Anderson speechless, but she wasn't wrong. Why should she listen to him? Who was he to her? What gave him the right to order her around? "If I can get Henry Owen to change his mind, would you be willing to represent the royal family?" Charles Anderson confirmed again. He admitted that Clara Blake was indeed very strong, but the royal family wasn't without other options. His actions carried a hint of personal motives. Clara Blake shrugged, showing no clear opinion. To her, it didn't matter who she represented, what truly mattered was who the ultimate reward would belong to. In the end, Charles Anderson failed to persuade Henry Owen. Despite being a prince, he couldn't use his status to force Henry Owen's hand. The Owens bloodline family held a significant position, and with their own internal strength, even the royal family couldn't disregard them. Left with no choice, he reluctantly selected another alchemist. Participants nominated by various factions had to go through preliminary rounds held in the capitals of their respective nations. Only the top 3 alchemists from each preliminary round would qualify for the finals of the Eastern Continent's most prestigious alchemist assembly. The final competition was set to take place in Clearwater City, located in the far south of the Eastern Continent, home to the headquarters of the Alchemist Guild. Today, the capital of the Vermilion Empire was bustling with excitement. Shops along the streets were closed, and the flow of people seemed to converge in one direction. At the southern edge of the city, at the base of the Purple River Mountain, lay an expansive martial arts arena. For years, the preliminary rounds of the alchemist competition had been held here, and this year was no exception. As dawn broke, the arena was already packed with onlookers. Many had camped out since the previous night to secure the best viewing spots. As the sky brightened, elders of the Alchemist Guild from various regions began entering the venue. These elders, all with white hair and beards, were seasoned veterans. There wasn't a single young face among them. An elder dressed in dark green robes announced the entry of the contestants and briefly explained the competition rules. However, as he scanned the scene, he noticed that the pathway designated for contestants, which had been prepared in advance, was now completely occupied by the crowd. The dense throng of people had surrounded the area, making it impossible to clear a path in a short amount of time. Chapter 39, Peter disappears. The alchemists waiting outside grew increasingly anxious, almost to the point of fainting. They only knew how to refine pills and had no understanding of martial arts. Seeing the thick crowd ahead, they were utterly helpless. At that moment, a pure white figure glided through the crowd and landed gracefully in the middle of the courtyard. Her black hair flowed in the wind, her eyebrows as delicate as a painting, as if she had stepped out of a masterpiece, breathtakingly beautiful. When the elders noticed the emblem on Clara Blake's chest, they were secretly astonished. So, she was the alchemist representing the Owens bloodline family. And she was so young, and a woman. Throughout history, alchemists were predominantly men. Female alchemists were rare, and among them, none had ever achieved the pinnacle of success. Yet, in such a high-level competition, the Owens bloodline family had sent a young woman to participate. Clara Blake's appearance caused a stir among the crowd. Her beauty was like that of a celestial maiden, her demeanor angelic, and every movement exuded an unparalleled charm. In previous competitions, the participants were always elderly men or middle-aged uncles. When had anyone seen such a young, beautiful woman? Truly a rare sight. Before long, all the contestants were escorted into the arena by martial arts experts, and the preliminary round of the alchemy competition officially began. A total of 68 contestants entered the vast arena, where 68 wooden tables were neatly arranged in rows. Each table bore the contestant's name along with the recipe and the required ingredients for pill refinement. Clara Blake was assigned to position 18 in the second row. Glancing at the name on the recipe, she couldn't help but chuckle. Vitality Nourishment Pill. It was merely a second-grade pill, a very common type on the market. If lucky, one could purchase it for just a few hundred silver coins. The ingredients for the pill were provided by the alchemy shop under the Owens bloodline family's management. They offered the ingredients for free, reclaimed the successful pills, and bore the losses for any failures. What a lucrative business! Being selected to participate in the competition, how could anyone fail to refine even a second-grade pill? Though they provided free ingredients, they could retrieve pills of greater value. Such a profitable venture, who wouldn't want to participate? Clara Blake retrieved her cauldron and began placing the ingredients inside one by one. A faint blue flame enveloped the dozens of ingredients, extracting their essence. She then fused the essences together, using her powerful spiritual force as an alchemist to control the flame's temperature. Gradually, the liquid and powdered essences merged completely, eventually forming a pill. Among the 68 contestants, apart from Clara Blake, the rest were middle-aged men and elderly participants, seasoned alchemists with decades of experience in pill refinement. Unfortunately, the achievements of an alchemist were not determined by age. A truly exceptional alchemist must have significant accomplishments at a young age, which is referred to as talent. These contestants, who repeatedly participated in the preliminary rounds, clearly lacked such extraordinary talent. They relied solely on years of hard work, but how could that compare to natural prodigies with an innate sensitivity to alchemy? In the first preliminary round, 32 contestants were eliminated, leaving 36 to advance to the second round in 3 days. As Clara Blake stepped out of the arena, Henry Owen hurried over, his face filled with panic. Peter is missing. Clara Blake's face turned pale as she grabbed Henry Owen by the collar and shouted, "What's going on? Didn't I tell you to keep an eye on him?" Henry Owen looked regretful, admitting that he had been too engrossed in watching the competition earlier. Peter said he was bored and wanted to find Uncle Quinn to play with, so I let a servant accompany him. Who would have thought the servant would lose him? Uncle Quinn. Julian Quinn. Without wasting time scolding Henry Owen, she pushed him aside and dashed off. Her movements were as swift as lightning, disappearing in an instant. Charles Anderson approached Henry Owen and asked, "What happened? Why is she like that?" Apart from the first time he met Clara Blake at the Crown Prince's residence, he had never seen her lose her composure like this. Henry Owen looked dejected. "Peter is missing." If they couldn't find Peter, he didn't dare imagine the consequences. "What? You idiot! How could you lose Peter? Don't you know he's Clara Blake's lifeline?" Charles Anderson angrily glared at Henry Owen, tempted to punch his handsome face into oblivion. Clara Blake sprinted all the way to the Sky Splitter Hall. The guards who tried to stop her were sent flying. "Peter Blake, come out here now." Clara Blake fought her way through, defeating 5 guards and 6 commanders. Her stamina was gradually depleting. This hall was unlike ordinary places, just the patrol alone consisted of dozens of people, all skilled fighters above the 6th rank. Although they were no match for her individually, their numbers gave them an advantage. After a prolonged struggle, her energy was significantly drained. Another wave of patrol guards surged forward, ready to battle Clara Blake. At that moment, a figure in green flew toward them from afar. "Stand down." The patrol guards retreated respectfully to the side. Clara Blake also eased her stance, raising an eyebrow at the man before her. He was the same man who had accompanied Julian Quinn last time. "I am Gillian Sena, the left guardian under the hall master." "Greetings, Miss Clara Blake," Gillian Sena said with a respectful demeanor, clasping his hands in greeting. "Cut the nonsense. Where is Peter Blake?" Clara Blake cut straight to the point, her frustration evident. She had fought so hard, yet her son had not appeared. Was he waiting for her to collapse from exhaustion? When she found him, she would definitely spank his little bottom. Gillian Sena replied, "The young master went with the hall master to the back mountain to play. They said they were going fishing and haven't returned yet." "The back mountain?" Clara Blake lifted her gaze toward the lush green mountains behind the hall. Biting her lip, she thought, "Peter Blake, if I catch you, you're dead meat." Refusing the company of Gillian Sena, Clara Blake ran alone towards the mountain at the back. It was twilight and a gentle evening breeze blew in, carrying the red, blood-like glow of the setting sun. She ran along the streams, searching for traces of the 2 people. Just as the sun was about to set, she finally found them by a stream behind the purple bamboo forest. On the bank, a fire was lit, roasting a few fresh fish. Meanwhile, Julian Quinn and Peter Blake were still in the water, catching fish and splashing around. In the last rays of the setting sun, the smiles on their faces were radiant and carefree. She realized she had never seen Peter smile like that before, a joy that came from deep within his heart. Suddenly, Peter slapped the water, and a large fish flipped over with its white belly exposed. Peter jumped up in excitement, but his feet slipped, and he fell back into the water. Seeing this, Julian Quinn immediately tossed the fish he was holding aside and grabbed Peter, ignoring his soaked clothes. He lifted Peter onto his shoulders, one hand supporting Peter's legs and the other picking up the fish from the water, his face full of laughter. Would anyone else treat Peter this way? Would Peter smile so brightly with anyone else? "Oh, mother." Peter's cheerful face instantly turned into one of guilt. He had sneaked off to the Sky Splitter sect, and his mother must have been frantically searching for him. She must be furious. Julian Quinn's smile grew even brighter as he carried Peter to the shore, laughing, "Arriving early is not as good as arriving at the right time. Wait a little longer, and the delicious food will be ready." Seeing the 2 of them like this, Clara's anger dissipated completely. She took Peter off Julian Quinn's shoulders and changed him into a clean set of clothes. Chapter 40, You should never appear again, Peter Blake, do not repeat this mistake again, or you already know the consequences. Upon hearing this, Peter Blake's small, gloomy face suddenly brightened. Mother is the best. Then he planted a quick kiss on Clara Blake's cheek. Julian Quinn smiled, his dark, gem-like eyes sparkling. It seemed as though years of accumulated gloom in his gaze had vanished in that moment. He handed a freshly grilled fish to Clara Blake. Try this, it's the legendary dish that could make a wife who left home return. Clara Blake chuckled, accepting the grilled fish. I must taste it and see what kind of flavor can make a wife change her mind. She took a bite of the tender white fish from the belly, removed the bones, and fed a piece to Peter. Even before swallowing, the aroma lingered on her tongue. The taste was no different from the grilled fish she had eaten before, yet it seemed unusually fragrant. Perhaps it was because of hunger, she thought, while looking at Peter's radiant little face. Her mood lightened, and an unbidden smile graced her beautiful features. Julian Quinn imitated Clara Blake, carefully removing the fish bones for Peter and feeding him fragrant pieces of fish. Clara Blake paused her eating and looked across the fire. On that handsome face of his, there was such warmth, nothing like the cold, heartless man rumors described. Uncle Quinn, Mother said she wants to find the best father in the world for Peter. Peter likes Uncle Quinn. Can Uncle Quinn be Peter's father? Peter's chubby little hand clutched Julian Quinn's sleeve, his small face full of hope. Julian Quinn laughed, glancing at the flustered Clara Blake, and said with a smile, that decision is up to your mother. Peter quickly turned to look at Clara Blake, blinking his almond-shaped eyes that resembled Julian Quinn's, and said, Mother, I want Uncle Quinn to be my father. Is that okay? Clara Blake sighed inwardly. If he wasn't Julian Quinn, if he wasn't Julian, perhaps he could have been Peter's father. She threw the firewood aside, stood up, picked Peter up, and spoke to Julian Quinn, if Peter comes looking for you again, I hope you'll immediately bring him back to me. His illness could relapse at any time, and he cannot be away from me for too long, or the consequences could be dire. Pausing briefly, she added, for Peter's sake, I hope you'll try not to appear around him anymore. Your identity is too unique, and I don't want Peter to get hurt because of you. The smile on Julian Quinn's face gradually faded. Standing silently in the night breeze, he watched her figure disappear into the distance and murmured softly, What you're worried about, I will make sure it never happens. At the Duke's residence. A shadow, as swift as a phantom, slipped into the estate, moving with familiarity toward the Soli courtyard. Before entering, he noticed several other shadows in the wide courtyard, sneaking around as if searching for something. He tore off the black cloth covering his face, his cold, thin lips curving into a chilling smile. His tall figure stepped into the moonlight, standing under its cold glow. Looking for me? His perfectly shaped lips curved into a bloodthirsty smirk as he gazed at the figures before him, as if looking at corpses. Are you Julian? The masked leader asked coldly. Julian let out a derisive snort. Assassins from the Dark Moon Tower who don't even know the face of their target? The eyes of the masked leader narrowed behind the black cloth, radiating intense killing intent. Whether you're Julian or not, tonight you must die. The leader signaled with his hand, and two tall, masked figures immediately lunged from both sides of Julian. The three formed a pincer attack, their palms charged with energy. Pale blue and light purple auras glimmered eerily in the dark as they executed their deadly technique without hesitation, striking straight at Julian. Julian shifted slightly, easily dodging the coordinated attack of the three assassins. The mocking smile on his lips deepened. Is this the extent of the Dark Moon Tower's skills? The masked leader's expression darkened. Though they hadn't directly clashed, the fact that their combined attack was effortlessly evaded, coupled with their inability to gauge Julian's strength, pointed to only one possibility. His martial prowess had reached the heavenly earth profound yellow realm, at least at the yellow tier. His energy was colorless and his aura concealed. Unless he attacked, he appeared no different from an ordinary person. No wonder their master had dismissed him as a useless man with no martial skills. Who would have thought that someone so young would have such profound martial cultivation? The masked man darted his eyes around, seeking an opportunity to flee. He knew very well that even if the three of them joined forces, they would stand no chance against a yellow rank expert. It was better to escape first, return to the Dark Moon Tower to report, and request reinforcements stronger than the yellow rank. However, Julian would never give him such a chance. Murderous intent surged out as his hands quickly formed seals. An overwhelming force, terrifying in its might, descended like a harbinger of death, sending chills down spines. The three didn't even have time to feel the pain of transitioning from life to death before their breath ceased. Three tall figures slowly collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Julian, his face devoid of emotion, formed seals again, unleashing two palm strikes at the three corpses. A torrent of primordial energy, brimming with destructive power, turned the still warm bodies into ashes. Tranquility returned to Soli residence, while the Floral Grace residence on the other side was bustling with activity. Mother consort, I truly like Ben Hope. I beg you, please grant me this wish. Billy Anderson knelt before the consort of Prince Juan, putting on a pitiful expression and persistently pleading with his mother. The consort of Prince Juan raised her snow-white hand to rub her forehead, her face showing helplessness. Her eyes, however, betrayed the affection she had for her son, though she maintained a stern demeanor. Count for yourself, how many women are already in your chambers? That vast Quinland pavilion of yours may no longer have space left, right? And now, you even dare to bring a courtesan from a brothel into the prince's residence? Do you still intend to inherit your father's princely title? Billy Anderson pouted and mumbled, with you around, mother, it's hard for me not to inherit it. The consort's expression darkened as she gritted her teeth and said, you ungrateful child. All my meticulous planning is solely for your future, and yet you dare to blame me? Seeing his mother enraged, Billy quickly smiled and said, Mother, you misunderstood. What I meant is that your strategies are so brilliant that, no matter what, the title will not escape our grasp. The consort's expression softened slightly, and she finally said, Billy, you must understand that everything I do is for you. If one day your father passes away and the title falls into someone else's hands, imagine how miserable our position in this household would become. Billy frowned as visions of himself being trampled underfoot by his elder brother, his concubines leaving him one by one, and his once glorious life crumbling flashed through his mind. He quickly shook his head, resolutely deciding to follow his mother's plans. He was determined to claim the title of Prince Juan's successor. But before that, he had to bring Ben Hope into the residence. After another round of begging and pleading, the consort finally relented, agreeing to his request on the condition that he acted discreetly and ensured no outsiders found out. Should anyone inquire, he was to blame everything on Julian. Chapter 41, secretly hiring an assassin. Billy Anderson had just slipped away when a fierce-looking woman quietly snuck into Donghua Pavilion. Leaning close to Princess Juan, she whispered something in her ear. The princess's face darkened as she abruptly stood up and asked, Is that true? Did you see it with your own eyes? The fierce woman, equally alarmed, lowered her head and replied, Your Highness, it is absolutely true. I witnessed it myself. Julian was completely different today, like a demon in human skin, ruthless and merciless in his actions. If she hadn't seen it herself, she wouldn't have believed it. How could a frail young heir suddenly transform into a formidable force? Even the top assassins of the Shadow Moon Tower fell one after another under his hands. Princess Juan's face twisted with rage as her delicate hand slammed onto the table, shattering the sturdy century-old pearwood furniture into splinters. Julian, you dare to play tricks under my nose. No wonder all these years, no matter what I did, you remained unscathed. So, you've been hiding your true power all along. Seeing this, the fierce-looking woman hurriedly asked, Your Highness, should I go and seek assistance from the Eastern Fang clan? Before her marriage, Princess Wan was the second young lady of the Eastern Fong clan. Within the Vermilion Empire, the Eastern Fong clan's status was second only to the Owen's bloodline clan, with profound and unfathomable strength. If they secretly lent their support, eliminating someone as insignificant as Julian would be as easy as flipping a hand. Princess furrowed her brows. Even the top-tier masters of the Dark Moon Tower couldn't get close. Just how strong was this man? No need to alarm the Dongfang family yet. I'll make a trip to the Dark Moon Tower myself. Her father had once advised her, if something could be resolved personally, then handle it yourself. Only when there was no other choice should she rely on the trump card of the Dongfang family. Under the cover of darkness, Princess Consort went alone to the Dark Moon Tower. Using the token of a customer, she headed straight into the branch headquarters of the Dark Moon Tower in the capital of the Vermilion Empire. The steward, who had been tasked with handling Princess Consort's request, wore a grim expression. The operatives sent out had not returned, and the soul plaques of the assassins in the Soul Pavilion had shattered one after another, signifying their demise. According to Princess Consort, the target was merely a useless man. How could he possibly have taken down 3 top-tier assassins? Princess Consort, you owe the Dark Moon Tower an explanation. How could top-tier assassins from the Dark Moon Tower fall at the hands of a mere cripple? The steward glared coldly at Princess Consort and barked out. Princess nonchalantly waved her hand and replied, in the assassin's line of work, it's not uncommon to encounter such incidents. Why are you pinning all the blame on me? The steward snorted coldly and said, if it weren't for you calling him a useless person, why would I have sent assassins without investigating? That's your business. What does it have to do with me? She glared at the steward, paused for a moment, and then continued, I didn't come here today to argue about who's right or wrong. I want to know what your next move is. Next move? The price you offered was only enough to kill a useless person. Now that this useless one has turned into a master, and Dark Moon Tower has lost 3 elite assassins, what else do you expect us to do? The steward spoke irritably. The Princess of Wan waved her hand nonchalantly and said, money is not an issue. What I want to know is whether Dark Moon Tower can still complete this mission. The steward's expression softened slightly. After all, Dark Moon Tower operated in this bloody business for one reason, money. With money, things naturally became easier. For someone who could kill 3 7th-rank martial experts from our Dark Moon Tower in one go, his strength must be at least 8th rank. You know as well as I do that on the entire Eastern continent, 8th-rank experts are not easy to find. The steward looked at the noble and elegant Princess of Wan, his eyes filled with greed. The princess's maternal family, the Eastern Fong clan, was notoriously wealthy, possessing an unimaginable fortune. The Princess of Wan cast a disdainful glance at the steward, stood up leisurely, and pulled out a stack of banknotes from the spatial ring on her finger. Without bothering to count, she tossed the thick wad of notes onto the desk in front of him. This is at least 200,000 taels of gold. Shouldn't that be enough to hire a 9th-rank assassin? The steward eagerly grabbed the stack of banknotes, his face beaming with delight as he responded repeatedly, rest assured, Princess. This time, success is guaranteed. Hope so. The Princess Consort of Wan turned around, unaware of a shadow flitting past outside the study. She walked alone, leaving the Dark Moon Pavilion and returning to the Wan Prince's residence. The steward gleefully counted the silver notes, while the young attendant serving tea chuckled and remarked, this Princess Consort of Wan is truly generous. I wonder what deep grudge she holds against Julian. The steward tucked the silver notes into his chest, sipped the freshly brewed tea, and laughed, what do you know? The Wan Prince is gravely ill and likely won't live much longer. He's only surviving now thanks to ginseng keeping him alive. Julian is the legitimate eldest son of the Wan Prince and his first wife, while the princess consort we just saw is merely a second wife who also has a son. By rank, the Wan Prince's title should pass to Julian, but do you think this princess consort would accept that? Once the Wan Prince dies, her and her son's position in the residence will be as precarious as a flickering candle in the wind. Naturally, she has to plan ahead. The shadow that had left returned again, just in time to overhear the entire conversation. Behind the black veil, a pair of almond-shaped eyes glinted coldly, and under the fabric, the corners of the lips curved into a chilling smile. The shadow waved a hand, and flames erupted. In an instant, the Dark Moon Pavilion was engulfed in a rapidly spreading inferno. The steward, who had just tucked the stack of silver notes into his spatial ring, was caught off guard as a fireball flew through the window, landing directly on the stack of notes. The 20,000 gold-tail fortune turned to ashes in moments. The steward had no time to lament his loss. Struggling to crawl out of the fiery hell, he found his body paralyzed, unable to summon any strength. Moreover, his internal organs felt as though they were being scorched, the pain unbearable. His soot-covered face was filled with terror. The soul plaques in the secret chamber are burning. Put out the fire, quickly. The steward collapsed, and the young attendant beside him fell as well, dying in the same manner. Anyone who joined the Dark Moon Pavilion was required to offer a portion of their soul into specially crafted soul plaques. As long as the person lived, the plaque remained intact. If the person died, the plaque would shatter. Conversely, if the plaque was destroyed, the individual would not survive either. By dawn, the branch of the Dark Moon Pavilion in Vermilion's capital had completely vanished. The princess quickly received the news and immediately sent a pigeon letter to the Dongfang family. The fire at the Dark Moon Tower flared up in such a suspicious manner. She had just left when the fire broke out. The flames were too strange, and the Dark Moon Tower would certainly investigate thoroughly. It could very well implicate her, and at this moment, she needed the support of the Dongfang family. The illness of Prince Wan became increasingly severe, his breath labored. As for Julian, the thorn in Princess Wan's side, he was still alive and well, appearing before her every day. She was so furious that she ground her teeth. After careful consideration, she finally decided to take matters into her own hands. In the quiet of the night, as if the entire world had been swallowed by darkness, a slender figure sneaked into Yen Ding residence, one hand holding a long sword, the other a short dagger, both weapons from the secret martial art of the Lu Yun / from the Dongfang family. Inside, the room was brightly lit. A young man with jade-like features was reading under the light. His right ear twitched slightly, and the corner of his lips curled into a cold smile. The shadow outside the door stood silently, continuously sending out spiritual energy, probing the situation inside. However, the energy she sent out seemed to vanish like a stone sinking into the sea, completely disappearing. ### Chapter 42, Let You Die. Knowing, she thought to herself, with her peak 7th grade martial arts strength, could she really not sense what was happening behind this decayed wooden door? If you've come, then show yourself. A deep and powerful voice pierced through the intricately carved door. As the words fell, the door opened, and a surge of energy rushed in. The Princess of Wan, dressed in black nightwear with her face covered by a black veil, her beautiful eyes filled with vigilance, finally dismissed the last trace of doubt in her heart. He was indeed no useless man, and yet she had no idea. Time and again, he escaped fatal blows. She thought it was sheer luck, little did she know he was a hidden master. Julian raised his eyes, his peach blossom-shaped eyes full of mockery, and spoke calmly. "It's all right, you all go ahead." Clara Blake anxiously looked at Peter. If Julian Quinn couldn't get in, what about Peter? He probably wouldn't be able to get in either. Julian Quinn noticed Clara Blake's worried expression and smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry, I'll bring Peter in later." Clara Blake was astonished. "Didn't you say there's a barrier here? How will you get in?" Julian Quinn smirked. "I have my own tricks. A mere spatial barrier is nothing I can't handle." Henry Owen saw Julian pulling Peter back and immediately turned to tease Charles Anderson, "Seize the opportunity, make your move while the kid's not around." Charles Anderson said nothing, merely glanced at Julian, then joined Sophia Lewis in blending into the crowd, waiting for the roll call to enter. A middle-aged man holding a list began calling names. Today, there were a total of 60 alchemists and 60 escorts arriving at Clearwater City, making a total of 120 people. The middle-aged man held a jade piece that contained the information and images of everyone present. He carefully cross-checked the details, and after confirming everything, he took out another jade tablet. Closing his eyes, he infused spiritual energy into it while chanting an incantation. From the jade tablet, a pale green light shot out, gradually condensing in front of him and forming a spatial rift. The rift grew larger, resembling a city gate. With a wave of his cloak, the middle-aged man invited everyone to enter. Among the 120 people, some had been to Central Eastern City before, but the majority were witnessing such a domineering spatial barrier for the first time, marveling silently. Once everyone had entered Central Eastern City, the massive spatial rift resembling a city gate slowly closed. The group of flying beasts gradually took off, turning back the way they came. The vast open land was left with only Julian Quinn and Peter Blake. Julian Quinn strolled leisurely, as if searching for something. Suddenly, he stopped, gazing into the empty space ahead, and calmly said, "This is the place." Suddenly, he raised both hands, his 10 fingers slightly curved, and slowly tore them apart to the sides. Quickly, a spatial rift appeared before him. He pulled Peter along and stepped inside, and the rift behind them slowly closed. All contestants participating in the Alchemist Guild's Grand Tournament were arranged to stay in the Guild's residential area. Here, regardless of your previous status, everyone was treated equally. Whether it was accommodations or daily necessities, everything was identical. Clara Blake, Sophia Lewis, and other alchemists were assigned to Zone 3, while Charles Anderson, Henry Owen, and their companions were placed in Zone 4. Clara Blake, did Julian the Heir and Peter really just leave like that? Suddenly, he raised both hands, his 10 fingers slightly curved, and slowly tore them apart to the sides. Quickly, a spatial rift appeared before him. He pulled Peter along and stepped inside, and the rift behind them slowly closed. All contestants participating in the Alchemist Guild's Grand Tournament were arranged to stay in the Guild's residential area. Here, no matter what your previous status was, everyone was treated equally. Whether it was the accommodation or daily necessities, everything was identical. Clara Blake, Sophia Lewis, and other alchemists were also arranged in the same manner. Here, regardless of your previous status, everyone was treated equally. Whether it was accommodations or daily necessities, everything was identical. Clara Blake, Sophia Lewis, and other alchemists were assigned to Zone 3, while Charles Anderson, Henry Owen, and their companions were placed in Zone 4. Clara Blake, did Julian the Heir and Peter really just leave like that? Those in Area 3, while Charles Anderson, Henry Owen, and their companions were in Area 4. Clara Blake, Julian the Heir, and Peter just left like that? Sophia Lewis still couldn't believe it. With Clara Blake's personality, she would never let someone else take care of her son for such a long time. Clara Blake calmly replied, "Who said they left?" She suddenly glanced out the window and added, "Aren't they coming right now?" Sophia Lewis followed her gaze and saw that the previously empty windowsill now had 2 heads, one large and one small. Who else could it be but Julian Quinn and Peter? Julian Quinn glanced at Sophia Lewis, as if regarding him as a mere passerby. The usually calm and composed expression on Sophia Lewis's face shifted slightly. He truly couldn't believe his eyes. He clearly remembered that when the spatial rift closed, Julian and Peter were still outside. Yet now, the two stood right before him. What on earth was going on? Could it be that he possessed the ability to tear through space? How could this be possible? How old was he? He was the same age as him, and even if he had started cultivating in his mother's womb, there was no way he could have such power. The Grand Alchemist Tournament has finally officially begun. A total of 380 participants have joined, representing over 100 nations across the eastern continent. An elderly man with silver hair and a rosy complexion appeared on the podium of the tournament hall. He loudly addressed the 380 alchemists below. Everyone here is among the elite alchemists of the eastern continent. Today, we gather not only to compete but also to challenge ourselves and push our limits. Only under immense pressure can one truly reveal their real potential. I hope everyone gives their utmost effort. As long as you make it to the top 3, you will have the chance to enter the Alchemy Palace and select the most precious elixir of your desire. This is the ultimate reward of the tournament. However, this time, there is an additional prize, the Dragon's Heart Flame. Everyone surely knows what the Dragon's Heart Flame represents. As long as you reach the top 3, you will have the opportunity to enter the Gate of Heart Flame. If you can subdue the Dragon's Heart Flame, then it will belong to you. So, everyone, please showcase your true abilities, unleash your infinite potential, take on the challenge, defeat your opponents. The competition begins. Chapter 51, Where is your potential? Dragon Heart Flame. Clara Blake's beautiful face lit up. If she could obtain the Dragon Heart Flame and use it to refine the blood elixir, the medicinal properties would undoubtedly improve, significantly increasing the chances of curing Peter. For dear Peter, I must make it into the top 3. I must conquer this Dragon Heart Flame. 380 alchemists stepped into their respective alchemy zones, summoned their cauldrons, and received the recipe handed to them by the attendants. The recipe contained only a few words, as the heart desires. This meant that the competition rules allowed contestants to freely demonstrate their skills. Whoever crafted the highest grade pill with the best quality would be the winner. Clara Blake summoned her fire cauldron. She didn't rush to take out her ingredients but quietly observed the others around her. 380 people, a grand lineup, not just for show. Every alchemist here was a prodigy, the pride of their respective regions. Each person exuded confidence. Clara Blake glanced at them, and they were also evaluating one another, gauging the strength of their opponents. According to Clara Blake's perception, apart from a few individuals who could pose a threat to her, the rest were essentially not worth worrying about. Clara Blake contemplated the alchemy formulas. In her previous life, she had memorized all the formulas within her clan since childhood, from low grade to high grade. As long as it was a formula from the pill sect, there wasn't a single one she hadn't studied. The highest grade formula in the pill sect was for a mid-level 9th grade pill. There were no formulas beyond that. In her previous life, Clara Blake's strength had only reached the 8th grade. The only time she ever crafted a 9th grade pill was with the assistance of the clan elders. Since her reincarnation, she hadn't attempted to craft anything above 8th grade. Now, however, she felt an urge to give it a try. At this moment, her martial strength had already reached the 9th grade, and her soul power had naturally advanced as well, providing a foundation for crafting a 9th grade pill. In the eastern continent, how many people could truly reach the 9th grade realm? As the silver-haired, youthful-faced elder had said, how could one know their potential without giving it their all and trying? Having made her decision, Clara Blake began taking out the necessary ingredients listed in the formula. The 9th grade revival pill had the ability to resurrect someone whose soul had not yet dissipated. The formula for the revival pill had been lost for ages. In the eastern continent, it had been thousands of years since there was any trace of the revival pill. It was a treasure among treasures, rare and nearly unattainable. Clara Blake's expression turned serious. This was her first attempt at crafting a 9th grade pill. She was fully aware that without absolute certainty, 9th grade pills could easily backfire, harming the alchemist herself. At best, it could sever her meridians and render her a cripple. At worst, it could cost her life. Reaching the 9th grade, this pill had begun to develop a spiritual essence. If it reached an excellent quality, it could even transform its shape, appearing as either an animal or a human figure, catching people off guard and seizing the opportunity to escape. Clara Blake gathered all the rare treasures and resources from her storage ring, everything she had in reserve, to attempt this one time. If she failed, there would be no remaining materials to turn the situation around. Thus, she had no second chance, this was her only opportunity. Within the cauldron, a pale golden flame rose, immediately drawing numerous gazes. It was the first time they had ever seen such a brilliant pale golden flame. Its vibrant hue aside, just observing the fire revealed that it was no ordinary flame. Some knowledgeable individuals recognized it as a rare flame with immense power. Clara Blake placed all the medicinal herbs into the alchemy cauldron. The pale golden flames burned through hundreds of herbs, gradually extracting their essence. The refined essence, enveloped by pink flames, floated mid-air. 1, 2, 3, 100, 200, hundreds of pink flame clusters, each encapsulating a drop of essence, danced gracefully in the air, a truly majestic sight. Outside the courtyard, the crowd of citizens from Central Eastern City watched intently. Alongside them were the grand judges within the yard, their gazes all fixed on Clara Blake. She was undoubtedly the most prominent figure at the gathering. Of course, there were also some who noticed Sophia Lewis, positioned behind and to Clara Blake's left. His flames were a faint blue, exuding a peculiar and eerie aura, a rare type of flame. His alchemy method was strikingly similar to Clara Blake's, as he also placed all the herbs into his cauldron and simultaneously refined hundreds of them. At this moment, Clara Blake had completed the refining phase. Gazing at the thousands of pale golden flames suspended in the air, her expression grew more serious. The next step was the most critical, leaving no room for error. She turned her head to observe the progress of others and noticed that Sophia Lewis had also just finished his refining. His eyes coincidentally met hers. Their gazes locked, but their thoughts couldn't have been more different. In this moment, Sophia Lewis recalls the first time she met Clara Blake. Clara was holding 2-year-old Peter in one arm while skillfully refining pills with the other. Her delicate and beautiful face was filled with worry yet radiated determination. Afterward, Clara and Peter stayed in the Spirit Herb Valley. Occasionally, they would sneak into the sacred grounds of spirit herbs to steal the precious herbs meticulously cultivated by the Spirit Herb clan. To ensure Clara could remain in the valley, Sophia shamelessly pleaded with the elders multiple times and secretly protected her. To save Peter's life, Sophia stole the Spirit Herb clan's treasured artifact, the Chilan fruit, which ultimately led to her being expelled by her father from the clan. This time, in order to help Clara obtain the last 2 spirit herbs needed for the blood transformation pill, Sophia did not hesitate to travel thousands of miles with her to Clearwater City to participate in an alchemist competition she utterly despised. She did all of this simply to ensure she could always see Clara's smile and to hope that the sorrow between Clara's brows would completely disappear. At this moment, Clara Blake was pondering whether she should ask Sophia for help. If they both made it into the top 3, Sophia could also receive a spirit herb from the medicine pavilion. Clara collected her thoughts, waved her sleeve, and cast hundreds of pale golden flames into the cauldron, beginning the refining process. She extended her left hand, and a magic crystal appeared in her palm, a top-tier, 7th-grade pale blue crystal, only required when refining 9th-grade pills. Clara threw the magic crystal into the pale golden flames. The flames tempered the crystal, something ordinary fire could never accomplish. Only those who possessed rare flames would dare to attempt refining 9th-grade pills. The judges' seats erupted in murmurs. Among them were several advanced 9th-grade alchemists, individuals considered to be at the pinnacle of existence on the eastern continent. However, they were all old men with silver hair, while Clara Blake and Sophia Lewis were so young that it made them incredibly envious. Good heavens, how many years had it been since their old bones had last seen a 9th-grade pill appear at the alchemist assembly? At this moment, the black-clad man standing behind and to the left of Clara Blake also took out a magic crystal, which was also a 7th-grade magical beast crystal. Could it be that he, too, intended to refine a ninth-grade pill. The black-clad man threw the magic crystal into the fire cauldron. As he opened his mouth, a pale blue flame emerged, enveloping the magic crystal as it floated mid-air. At this instant, the arena seemed to belong solely to Clara Blake, Sophia Lewis, and the black-clad man. Everyone else appeared irrelevant, mere background figures. By the time the magic crystal had been refined, it was already early the next morning, just as the sun began to rise. Clara Blake's ninth-grade pill had entered its final forming stage. The pill-forming process was no less challenging than refining the magic crystal. In fact, it was even more intricate and delicate. At this moment, it was truly a test of soul strength. Chapter 52, A phenomenon descends from the heavens. Clara Blake used her extraordinary soul force to envelop each medicinal ingredient, meticulously merging them with the refined magic crystal. This process was exceedingly tedious and consumed a tremendous amount of soul energy. Without such exceptional soul power to sustain it, one would surely fall victim to the backlash of a ninth-grade pill. At best, it would cause severe injuries; at worst, it could cost one's life. At this moment, out of the initial 380 participants, more than 100 alchemists had already withdrawn due to running out of materials. Meanwhile, another 100 had completed their pill refinement amidst the roaring sounds from their cauldrons and submitted their results to the panel of judges. Now, the esteemed panel of judges had their eyes glued to Clara Blake, Sophia Lewis, and the mysterious cool guy in black. Hundreds of 7th and 8th grade pills offered up by others were treated as insignificant as mosquito bites on steel, completely ignored for fear of missing any moment of brilliance from the two main contenders. Aside from Clara Blake, Sophia Lewis, and the enigmatic man in black, there were still a few young alchemists, around Clara's age, diligently refining pills. These individuals were all prodigies from various factions, producing impressive intermediate-level 8th-grade pills. Despite their accomplishments, no one even raised an eyebrow at their efforts. All attention was fixated on Clara Blake, Sophia Lewis, and the shadowy figure in black. After submitting their pills, the rest quietly retreated, leaving only 3 people on stage. Finally, with a thunderous boom, an earth-shaking sound erupted from the cauldron of the man in black. A snake shot out at lightning speed, its body clad in a brilliant green armor. Some sharp-eyed individuals recognized it as a young form of the green-armored earth dragon. However, to the majority of the crowd, it merely appeared as an ordinary snake, albeit adorned with a few striking green scales. The green-armored snake glanced at the man in black for a split second before darting away at lightning speed. The young man in black shouted, "You can't escape me." With that, his body moved slightly, and he appeared behind the green-armored snake. Reaching out, he grabbed the snake firmly in his hand. Using his left hand, the man in black pressed on a pressure point beneath the snake's neck. Suddenly, the snake vanished, transforming into a pale green, round pill with an intoxicating fragrance. The rich aroma spread throughout Clearwater City, as if it sought to envelop the entire town. At that moment, another loud explosion erupted. The pale yellow flames in Clara Blake's alchemy furnace extinguished abruptly, and a brilliant green light shot out from within, soaring into the sky. Squinting their eyes, everyone realized it was another snake, a 3-headed one. Clara Blake leaped into the air. In an instant, she appeared behind the emerald snake, reached out, and captured it. Pressing on the pressure point beneath its neck, the snake gazed at her with a resentful look before transforming into a bright green pill that rested in her palm. A powerful fragrance filled the air, invading the nostrils of everyone present. "This smells incredible. All the pills made earlier combined can't compare to this one. Truly, the difference between level 8 and level 9 is astounding." Before anyone could recover, another deafening explosion echoed. Sophia Lewis's alchemy furnace burst with a resounding boom, and a dazzling golden light shot into the sky. It resembled a massive golden cat, yet with the majesty of a tiger. Sophia Lewis soared upward, capturing it effortlessly. The golden cat transformed into a pale gold pill, exuding a captivating aroma that mesmerized everyone. A level 9 pill completed, heavenly phenomena arise. The clear blue sky suddenly darkened, as if covered by a black cloth. The audience began to stir, and the seasoned alchemist standing nearby started to comment. This is the heavenly tribulation of a 9th grade pill. Only by surviving the strike of the 5-colored lightning can one truly become a 9th grade pill king. As the booming voice of the alchemist faded, several 5-colored clouds suddenly appeared in the sky, accompanied by deafening thunder, creating a magnificent spectacle. The 3 5-colored clouds drifted toward the alchemy field. Clara Blake felt the pill in her hand tremble slightly, as if it were trying to escape. Sophia Lewis quickly approached Clara Blake and whispered, "Use your vital energy to form a shield, protect the pill, and neutralize some of the lightning's force, or it will be shattered." Clara Blake knew Sophia Lewis was an expert in this field and immediately followed his instructions, using pale golden energy to form a shield to protect the pills. The trembling pills finally settled down, truly a remarkable item with a hint of sentience. The 3 pills, enveloped in energy, floated mid-air, ready to undergo a cleansing with the brilliant 5-colored lightning. The 5-colored lightning, dazzling like fireworks, struck the 3 pills, causing them to tremble violently as if freezing in fear, even letting out pitiful cries akin to wah wah like a baby seeking milk, evoking a sense of compassion. Fortunately, despite the 5-colored lightning being as ferocious as a starving lion, the 3 pills still floated proudly in the air, showing no signs of breaking. The fury of the 5-colored lightning gradually subsided, disappearing into the void, while the dark clouds hastily fled, leaving behind a clear blue sky. 3 divine pills fell from the heavens, obediently landing in the hands of their 3 rightful owners. All 3 simultaneously approached the panel of judges to present their spoils of war, the 9th grade spiritual pills. An elderly gentleman in a gray robe, his hands trembling as if possessed, stared intently at the 3 pills and asked in a quivering voice, "Honored ones, are you selling these pills?" "Not for sale." The 3 responded in unison, declaring that their wealth was already overflowing, so there was no need to sell such treasures. "No way, not happening." The elderly gentleman looked utterly dejected, his eyes filled with longing as he stared at the pills, drooling like a cat eyeing a piece of fat, his heart itching with desire. As for 9th grade alchemists, even these judges hadn't reached that level yet, so they naturally had no qualifications to comment. Judging by the level of authenticity, Sophia Lewis ranked first, Clara Blake second, and the young man in black reluctantly took 3rd place. The 3 would now compete for the Dragon Flame Heart, after which they would follow the members of the Alchemy Pavilion to its celestial realm. What is the Dragon's Heart Flame? Peter Blake grabbed Clara Blake's sleeve and asked. Clara Blake pondered for a moment before replying, "The Dragon's Heart Flame is the primordial flame of the Divine Dragon. Even after the Divine Dragon kicked the bucket, its primordial flame remains indestructible. If it enters a blessed land, it can absorb the essence of heaven and earth, ensuring the flame's eternal existence. Its energy is extremely pure, and if you possess it, refining pills would be flawless, with top-notch quality. Mother already has a unique flame, there's no need to fight for the Dragon's Heart Flame. Peter thinks that man in black doesn't seem